All right, hello and welcome everybody. Here by myself right now. We might have some other people hop in, but I've got quite a few things that I wanted to talk about today. So I just want to say first, welcome, hi, and good morning. Please hit the thumbs up button and say hello in chat if you're hanging out with me live, or even I guess if you come back and watch this later, hit the thumbs up button and just drop a comment instead. So how's everybody doing today? I just want to say hi in chat real quick and let everybody kind of get warmed up and welcome real quick, and then kind of dive into some of these topics that I've got. So there were 4 topics that I sent out that I want to talk about today, and then one that came up in chat earlier before we started. So let's I'll quickly list those off. So we're going to talk a little bit about job hunting and job searching that came up in chat, and I've got very specific tip that I wanted to share on that. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about risk versus reward, the lightning deals that are up right now, and those are linked down below, scriptable objects, and adding juice to your game. So hopefully some of that will be interesting and fun. We should have a fun Friday morning, I guess. So welcome everybody, and let's get started. So the first thing I want to do, actually, let's see, before we dive into the real deeper topics, let's just briefly share the lightning deals. So that only takes half a second. I can knock that off of my list. Got the tab right over here. Where are we at? So if you haven't seen them already, the asset store lightning deal has been going on for a couple days, and I think I did a video that went out yesterday, kind of showing some of the coolest things, at least things I thought were the coolest. But they've got it seems like it's 2 to 5 assets each day going on the lightning sale, where they're 70% off. And then if you use the code, it's just my name, BF22, down in the description, you get another 10% off. But the fantasy characters pack, I think, is the coolest one out of the stuff today. Although the city generator seems kind of interesting if I had a cool city thing. I'm not doing any VR stuff, so this one didn't really excite me that much. But I'm sure it probably is for some people that are into that stuff. So anyway, check them out. The link's down in the description and all that. That's pretty much all I wanted to say about that. Now let me jump over to talking about the question that came up, which was about getting jobs, because there's something very specific that I wanted to share. And let's see if I can find the question first. I got to get better at managing these tabs. I've got I don't know, 15, 20 different tabs split across a bunch of different windows. I lied. It's probably like 70 tabs split across a bunch of windows. So trying to find the correct thing. Let's close that and see if we can find the tab I was looking for with the question here. So what was it? It was Michael was asking earlier about let's see, where did he say the specifics? Oh, just kind of wanted to follow up on previous videos on work opportunities, CV tuning, and where to look for work. So one of the things I wanted to share specifically was the where to look for work. People always ask me where to find Unity jobs, and I wanted to just share a couple of the best places. And the one of them that I actually looked at right before this seems to be loaded up with them, and that's the cyber coders page. I've used this before to find jobs. It's pretty good for finding .NET and C# related jobs and some other code jobs, but they also have quite a few Unity positions. And you can see here they've got this one's only 4 days old. And make sure you look at the dates on these, because old ones tend to be sometimes just dead. So if they don't respond, that could be why. But you can see here they show their pay ranges, which I really like. Most of them are remote, and they'll list that they're remote, and they give pretty big descriptions on what the positions are. So these are all Unity full-time developer positions. Looks like they all start around, or they're all in the 6-figure range right now. This one's in person. This one is not remote either. This one is remote. And you can see there's a big range of them. Most of these are probably going to be, you can see most of them are senior positions, but not all of them are going to be senior positions. Like this one right here does not say senior, just a remote game developer. So I would start looking here. That's one of my favorite places. So check this one out. And then let's go look at, somebody's making a MOBA and hiring, Jesus, 200 to 250. You can see where some of the higher paying positions are, especially. But there are definitely some junior positions that pop up on here too. It's not only senior stuff that shows up here. Oh, crap. I just realized I'm not sharing the tab. Okay, there we go. Let's start over. So here's the Okay, let's get this up and right. I got to get my chat up so we can see it side by side. So this is the page I was talking about here, the cyber coders page, and I'm just gonna let's make them nice and big. Make it nice and big and squared off a bit. Here we go. So here you can see some of the positions. You just search for Unity. Don't search for Unity 3D. If you do that, I think you'll find, yeah, only a couple things. But if you just search for Unity, the actual name of the engine, there we go. You'll see a bunch of different positions paying anywhere from like I said, this one was 120 to 160 for just a regular Unity engineer. These aren't senior or lead or anything like that. And then they've got some senior positions down here, lots more senior positions, more remote positions. A lot of these are remote, and you can see the pay ranges are really good. They tend to be really good on this page. Seems like the low paying jobs don't really advertise here. You can get a good list of quite a few different ones. I'm going to drop the link for this down in the chat. Here was that principal mobile one making 200 to 250. So I'll drop this into chat so everybody can check it out if you're interested in any of those positions. Oh, and there's even a second page of them. You got a lead software engineer, remote blockchain thing. I don't know what that one is. Senior software engineer. Yeah, lots of different stuff in here. So this is again one of my favorite places, that cyber coders page. The other one is the. Let me pull it up, and I'll get it on. Let me get it onto the right tab real quick. There we go. The Unity job forum. So on this one, it's a little bit more free form. It's just an open forum, but people post positions constantly. You'll see there's new ones. Let's see, we've got Monday, yesterday, just different positions. And the quality of these posts is going to vary quite a bit. Some of them will have lots of info. Looks like this one's got quite a bit showing what the studio is about and what they're. Some of them will just be like a one liner or something really short, but there's definitely a lot of good positions on here, and I've hired quite a few people through this and found positions that I was interested in through this too. So those are my two kind of core resources. Synth asked if these are US only. I would say no. I mean, the ones on the asset or the Unity forums definitely are not going to be US only, because they're going to be from all around. You can see they're even posted in Mexico and even in other languages. The cyber coders ones, some of those probably will be US only, depending on the specific company. But the remote ones, I would expect, and not all of them are going to be positioned in the US, but the remote ones, I would expect you may be able to work outside of the US for a lot of them. At least half of them is probably my rough guess. You can see a lot of these are remote. How many out of the 25? 19 are remote, so only 6 of them require in person. So I don't know if you're interested in jobs. Those are the two kind of core places that I tend to look first, and I would recommend. If anybody's got something else in chat, though, let me know. Kind of curious if anybody's got better resources for game dev jobs. I used to use the Gamma Sutra job forum too, but then they got bought out, and I think things got weird. The UI totally changed and stuff, and I kind of stopped looking at it. I don't know if people still go on to there or not. So let's see. All right. So that was I think the kind of the core stuff that I want to talk about with the jobs, the best little bits of advice on actually finding positions. I do kind of want to do some more reviews though, the resume. So if somebody's got a CV, a resume that you want to have reviewed on stream or on probably on a recorded video so I can edit it a little bit, then feel free to send it over. I've got 1 or 2 lined up right now, and I'll probably, once I get like 3 or 4, do another video just hitting all of them and giving as much feedback as I can or as much advice as I can on those. So let's see what we've got here in chat. Let's see what everybody's saying. It's kind of quiet in chat right now. It's a quiet day. Is the Sunday developer show still on, or did I miss it? So right now the show has been moved to Fridays. So just doing it Friday morning. Normally at 10 a.m. I just kind of kicked off a little bit earlier because I was needing to blab about stuff and figured I'd just hop in and hang out with everybody in chat and talk about stuff. Let's see if anybody else hops in. But we'll probably be back with everybody sometime soon. I want to pick like a big, or not a big day, like a solid day and a solid schedule eventually where everybody can show up and we can hop in and do shows kind of more like the Sunday show was. But I haven't figured that out yet. We're still kind of moving stuff around, and there's a lot of stuff going on in the new office now, which I'll also have to do a tour of really soon. I got a bunch of different stuff popping up here, so it's keeping me super busy. Let's see. Hello from Norway. Hello, Tux. Hello from California. Oh, Midnight Oil, like the review. Yours was a really good one. Some of the resumes that came in were pretty awesome, so they were a lot of fun to review. And there was, I think, on each one had some different stuff to talk about that made it fun and interesting. It wasn't just all the same issues. Everybody kind of had slightly different things that I would recommend and change in there. But yeah, yours was really good. There was some good stuff in all of them, though. Let's see what we got in chat. Oh, hello, Nightmare Studio. And I think I'm gonna hop over to my next topics. So there were a couple other things I want to talk about. We'd already talked about the lightning deals. I wanted to talk. Yeah, you know what? I gotta talk about that one first. Let's talk scriptable objects or risk versus reward. I don't know. I'm not in a very cranky mood yet, so I think we'll start with scriptable objects. Oh, let's see. Hold on. There's a question here. I want to take a look at this one. I haven't been working since before the pandemic, not game dev. I'm worried about my resume. I'm continuing to build projects up, for a portfolio. My best bet. Well, I mean, I think your best bet is to start trying to get a job right away. I mean, building projects up for your portfolio is fun, but it's not, and it's useful, but it's not super fast and efficient. If you need to get a job, I would put all of your effort into actually getting the job. If you can't, assuming that you're in the position where you can, just start actually applying, constantly networking, reaching out to people, and seeing what you can find for positions and getting in there. Because building up your projects is great if you got like lots of spare time. You're doing it while you're going to school, while you're working other jobs and stuff. But if you're actually actively looking for a job, it's a very, very slow way to get your foot in the door that may or may not have any impact on the specific place that you get the job. So I would just start looking right away, applying everywhere and seeing what you can get into. A second. Yeah, that would be my recommendation. Don't wait and don't like hold off and just push until you've got something else, or like it's no, hold on, let me drop URI in here. What's up,
Hi
URI?
there. Pretty good. How are you doing?
I am doing great, doing good, really good. Just decided to hop in and start chatting. I just started a little bit early because I just felt chatty and I was sitting here like couldn't find things. I'm like, I just need to talk. I need to start going. But yeah, this question came up, and I assume you kind of agree, but I don't know. I would just my recommendation with these kinds of things is always like get out there and just start applying and start trying to get into the job. I feel like it's easy to get into that situation where like you just want to do a little bit more before you apply and keep getting ready and getting a little bit more ready and a little bit better before you do it. So
yeah, so I guess in my own words, I would say that programming is an infinite field. There is no, I know everything, so I'm good to go. You'll never know everything. You'll always know a certain amount. And you'll always find something that you can keep improving on. But if you don't go and you don't put yourself out there to try and get a job, you won't get a job. So by the merit of you can succeed if you try, you have to try.
And the more you try, the more places you put in the effort and actually try at, the more likely you are to get it. But you actually have to put in the effort. One of the things sometimes people do that shotgun shit and just go apply massively to 100 places without actually putting in any effort on any of them. But you got to actually put in effort on each application. Customize your resume and cover letter and all that stuff and your communications for that specific position.
Another thing about that is that if you apply for a job, you may get a job that wasn't the one you intended for. The chance is not 0%, even if you are aiming at a field that you know you're not ready for yet, which is subjective. Some people would think you're ready even if you don't think you are qualified. Seriously, just put yourself out there. You can keep improving while you do it. It's not like it's going to take your entire amount of time in the day just to send a resume and maybe make a call.
Yeah. I got nothing else to add. Yeah, just do it. It's one of the things I always tell my kids and everybody else that I know too. Like, just like stop waiting. Like, you don't need 5 of a thing. Like, I was actually talking to my son about this yesterday. We were talking about I'm gonna kick off a little tech channel because it's one of the things I like to do. So I always play with random tech shit, and I just wanted to do like a little tech review channel just for fun because I think it would be something that I would enjoy doing as a hobby. And we were talking about what we needed to get it started. And he's like, oh, well, we need like 5 videos and these other things. Like, nope, we need 1. We need like the bare minimum. Just get it out there and get going on it. And try to minimize those roadblocks. Try to always just kick the roadblocks out of the way. Like, if they're not mandatory, just jump on the thing that actually matters that you want to do.
Yeah, it comes down to the idea of friction and removing friction from processes that you want to achieve. Every single thing that is going to make you stop or slow the trajectory of you getting to the finish line needs to get removed so that you can have the best time that you can have. It's applying to all parts of life, by the way.
Yeah, it definitely isn't just for jobs. It's for everything. Let's see. Oh no, my camera died. Hold on a second. You can still hear me, right?
Yeah. Reminds me of the Eternal Night bug in Terraria.
Hold on. Well, yeah, I'm gonna switch this up. This actually gives me a chance now because I've got my. I was complaining that I couldn't find my other cam link, so I couldn't set up the second shot. Now I'm gonna have to switch to it. Let's see. Oh, bam.
So I'm seeing in the chat here that people are talking about the Code Monkey video about the how to use scriptable objects, or rather how to be careful when using scriptable objects.
Yes.
First off, that was a great video. Secondly, it kind of sidelined the point for a long time, I think. I enjoyed watching it, and it highlighted the problem very clearly. But it could have just started with, well, scriptable objects are a problem because they get loaded as an asset, and they don't actually save back because they are just an asset. You can change what you load at runtime. It doesn't mean it gets saved back in. And that was the short gist of it. But the video showed it, highlighted it very, very well.
Yeah. Well, and if it went straight to it, then it wouldn't have made it up to the time to hit monetization, and YouTube wouldn't show it. So
yeah, there is one thing I want to bring up though here. He said specifically that scriptable objects are meant for static data that doesn't change a lot. And generally, I agree with that. That is the fundamentally most convenient way to use scriptable objects. Perfectly good to have. But, this is a big but, Unity doesn't use them that way. Unity itself does not use scriptable objects in that mentioned way. And one very strong example of that is all the assets you use when you work with an animator component. Because the animator controller is a scriptable object type. And the state machine behaviors within it are scriptable objects. They extend scriptable object. You author all your data there with no intent of it changing at runtime, but these are behaviors, and they can get references, and they can use them, and they can change all of their contents at runtime. This is something to be mindful of, because just because something was designed with a clear intent doesn't mean this is the only capacity it has. If you need something more advanced, do not be afraid to test the limits of what you have.
and Fair point. I use scriptable objects. I mean, for data, but also for quite a few other random little things like that too. So I guess that's a good point. But I think in his video, the key point was just that as soon as you get out of that editor, it's going to change, and you'll be like, "Wait, what the hell happened?" Because that happened to me the first time. The first time I used them, I was like, "Oh yeah, this all works." And then I do a build, and like, "Hey, it doesn't work anymore." Like, oh, what's happened? I didn't realize that serialization only works in the editor.
Yeah, and I mean that applies to almost everything in these game engines and really any app, because the editor has special context. It comes with convenient asset loading. It actually skips a lot of it because it's already loaded. It has shortcuts for many of the methods that go on. The concept of play mode, pause, doesn't exist in the actual build. And sometimes, if you rely on that, specifically code related to that, it won't even let you build because it won't exist still. But other times, the behavior is actually different. So, for example, you can have if def defines is something that everybody knows, but there are actually fields that change their contents even if they exist in both sides. I don't remember which one specifically in Unity, but this is something common to many engines. Even in XNA, there are some fields that, depending on which mode you're working in, will change their own values. So even though the entire script compiles and you get a successful build, you'll get a different output at runtime. And being mindful of it can help you construct code in a more stable way, so that if you have a predictable environment, you won't have cases where there are things you didn't expect, you didn't think of the exact time. It worked on your machine, so it must have been fine, is one statement that comes up a lot. But it's not your machine, it's your build. And these builds change. Yeah. On that note, we actually had a lot of funny bugs with Terraria in the past 2 weeks in that regard. We added some tools to debug an issue on Mac, and that resulted in some scripts in our post build actually not running anymore on some people's machines because we tried to copy something from a folder and that folder didn't exist. So it destroyed the entire post build script. It was a very interesting find because we had like an empty folder. Somebody made it, specifically me in that case. The one folder there, somebody made it on their own PC, and then when the time came to push changes, it was an empty folder, and that empty folder wouldn't be tracked in Git. It wouldn't tell you, hey, you have to commit this. So the others tried to pull, and when they try to build, they can't get it. These kinds of things are the kind of stuff that destroys stability. You don't expect that it wouldn't work because your environment was okay for it. But if you follow proper unit testing, or rather testing principles, you know that you have to have an identical environment, somewhere that you know that everything is always stable, just so you can have the best experience possible going forward and not have magic bugs that show up for others.
Yeah, that's the benefit of having like a continuous build system that just runs and lets you know, because you get some warning, some indication, and if it's set up right, even an email like, "Hey, you broke the build." You can go fix it before everybody else pulls and realizes it.
Yeah. Do you want to take some questions from the chat?
Yeah, so I want to answer this one and a couple more that were down below. So some Archangel asked why Unity doesn't have a save feature for saving all the changes in the scene during gameplay, and I think that I can answer it as a just rough, easy one, or a rough kind of overarching one. But I think the core reason is that the stuff that would be getting saved there is your content for your game. So like that data is the stuff that's in your scene. The way that the scene is saved and serialized off is like the actual level content for your game. If that was getting changed, then you wouldn't have a way to go back to the original version of your game without downloading and repatching it or something. So there has to be something in there that's saving off the differences from the base version of the scene and yours. So there's not a real easy way to do that. There's probably an easy way that Unity could slap in one that kind of worked for most things, but then as you got to more complicated scenarios, I'm sure it would just fall apart. So I think that that's kind of why. They do have a little bit of stuff to help with saving. You can, the easy way, the quick and dirty way, you can just slap some stuff into player prefs temporarily until you come up with a better solution. But one of the questions that Michael asked was, if we could discuss the best way to save game data. And I don't know that there's going to be a best way, because it's going to vary from platform and game type. An MMO saves data totally different from how a single player mobile game saves data. So you want to talk about a couple of the different options? Maybe we can just discuss them.
Yeah.
I don't know. What does Terraria use? You guys use flat files
Okay.
locally, or a SQLite
So
database, or something crazy?
absolutely no database. We write to a file in the most simplest way we can. But before that, I want to go back to the Unity scene saving feature.
Yeah.
So first off, Unity does have that. But you have to do it manually. They don't automate the process for you, and there are a lot of reasons why they don't want to automate the process for you. So you know how you can look at the inspector at any given point in time, and you can copy component. And then later on, you can paste component values. So they do have the concept of knowing what you want to serialize and how to serialize it and load it back in the proper fields. You can do that to massive selections as well. The thing here is that they don't know what you want to save, and a lot of state changes when you're at runtime. The worst part is that not all of this change is serialized. And that means that if something relies on having certain internal non-serialized values change to reach a state that you see it in gameplay, then just copying the serialized fields and pasting them in won't get you the desired results. For example, not everything in a rigid body is meant to be serialized. You can just load a rigid body in a perfect moving state with internal data. So Unity tries to avoid letting you reach these weird corrupt states, and it's really difficult for them to do that. You could write a feature that copies all the values and pastes them in, so you can have a save state of play mode and bring it back into edit mode. But again, it's going to have a lot of caveats, and unless you know exactly what you're doing, it's not going to end up well. Now, the reason I want to bring this up is actually if you play on emulators, like Game Boy Advance and the likes, those games use very little memory. And the best way to ensure that everything is going to go exactly as you want it, saving state, is saving that entire block of memory and loading it back in. And a lot of those earlier emulators actually have that as a feature. You can literally save the state of the entire game and load it back in. Perfect save and load. Which is something I wish modern games had, but there is so much going under the hood because people want perfect running, easy to use systems. And writing systems like that is not does not come with a first priority of perfect save states. Now, going back to options on saving and what is the best one. So it comes down to what you have to do and what you want to do. If you are running an online game, you could give everybody their own save file. But if the save file is at the control of the player can change it. The player can corrupt it, the player can lose it. If you want the player to be able to access their save anywhere, then that save needs to be guaranteed on your side, which means you have to transfer it to that other player, which means that data has to go through the internet, which means you start caring about how much data goes through the internet. You can't save 100 megabytes of player data and keep sending them to the server. You don't have that amount of storage. You don't have that amount of bandwidth to allow that kind of syncing. So you start packing the data. Now, these are requirements that you choose to have. If you don't have them, you can literally just save to the simplest file possible, a text file. You can literally make a new text file and write the player's name, their position, whatever you want, and just load it up. And there you go, save system complete. So what I would recommend is that the best save system is the one that meets all of your requirements with the least headache possible. What your requirements are, I don't know. I can't know. There are many games that don't care at all if you save in an encrypted way or not, because there are many games that don't bother encrypting their saves because they don't care if you edit your save or not, because they are not competitive. They have nothing to gain from preventing you from editing your saves. There are games that will encrypt the save a tiny bit, so it make it slightly easier to edit. There are games that are going to also add a certain verification code at the end of a save so that they know if you made simple edits to it. A hash function, in that case, comes up a lot. And there are games that will straight up not let you keep the save file because it's on their end. And how they manage it on their end is not up to you to know. Um, for example, Jason, do you want to talk about databases and why we don't keep just a single player's save file for every player?
Oh yeah, I mean, so if you go back to old online games, they actually a lot of them used to do flat files for stuff too before databases got fast and started coming around. But then databases got quick, started scaling up, and became a really easy way to save off multiplayer game data. So if you're playing something that's a multiplayer game that's online, you're probably getting your data saved off either in some SQL type database or in a NoSQL type database, depending on the game. Some games go one way, some games go the complete opposite. Personally, I like the more structured databases just because they're easier to map to my head. But I find that the NoSQL ones tend to get confusing and messy for me. But the way that those work is generally that all of that data is getting accessed by some game server that you're logging into, and then that server is reading data from those databases and then saving some stuff back out to them. The problems that you end up with you end up with different types of problems there, where you have to worry about things like race conditions and people cheating by getting things to write to a database and then read from memory or some other stuff. A lot of like the old MMO dupes and exploits. Probably a lot of the current ones that still pop up are related to like timing of saves and stuff. So you've got some item, did something to it, and the database has saved your record, but you still have the item and you do something else to it, and you got 2 copies of it or some shit. Very very common. So you just have to be careful with it. And when you're working with databases in general, one of the things to just note, sometimes I see people get confused by this. You don't ever want your clients connecting to the database. I've seen some people, they start coding it this way because it works, and it seems right and it seems okay, but you don't want to actually have your clients logging in and making direct calls to whatever your database is. That should be going through some game server, some API that they're authenticated with that's limiting what they can do, because the database is not going to limit them. But for local files, so say you're just saving off locally, you said that you guys save just to a text file. Do you
Yeah, essentially.
serialize that just like a binary serializer,
So,
or how do you do all that? Or what do
okay,
you recommend?
so Terraria uses 2 formats for saving. Specifically, one of them is a JSON file for the config, because that's something that we want players to have easy access to. If they have settings that they want to edit, they can edit it there. If everything fails in the game for whatever reason, and we've had very weird cases where people weren't able to access certain settings. So that's a player facing file. We want them to be able to edit it. We're making it easy to edit. JSON files are very easy to read, very easy to parse through, find what you want to change, and change it. The values are intuitive. You see the name of the thing you're trying to edit and then the exact value of it. Nothing complicated there. But for the actual players, we have a lot more data to keep. And that data isn't always very nicely, easily presentable. We needed more control of it, and the game started with binary serializer, something that is not recommended these days for many reasons. But
Well, that's just the binary formatter that's not recommended, right?
well, yeah, I mean, if you use a binary serializer, you use a binary formatter.
But I mean,
Um,
binary serialization in general is not
yeah,
unrecommended, right? It's
Well,
the
I mean,
Microsoft specific implementation of that one. Sorry.
okay, yeah, it has security issues specifically in that one implementation, yes. But there are also many reasons that you don't want that from a convenience perspective as a developer. So we use binary serialization, and we use that for players and worlds. A Terraria world can have 20 million tiles, blocks in the game, and 20 million blocks is a lot to serialize as text. This is going to literally blow up a save file so much that it's going to be infeasible to keep it that way. So binary serialization and compression are both used to cut down the file size. There is also a tiny bit of encryption, but that's pretty much a legacy feature at this point. And other than these two, we don't have anything else. But I wanted to bring up the idea of how simple it is to implement cloud saving in a game. Because to those who don't know much about cloud saving, they think it's something extremely complicated and like out there in the ether. How the hell do I do cloud saving? So in the case of Steam, it's literally a single line of code to say, take my file and put it on the Steam cloud. And all Steam Cloud does behind the hood is take your file, put it in another folder that Valve does all the hard work of syncing upwards. And when you take another PC, log into your account, it literally downloads that file. And when you ask it, hey, what do I have on the cloud? It literally just shows you what's in that folder. You can actually find the folders and you can access them and you can edit the values, but that doesn't ever end well. And there are a lot of very complicated steps on how to actually change what's in your cloud. But you can, and this is important because there is functionally no difference in how you parse the file that you ask them to take. You can make any type of save file you want, and you can accept it perfectly fine from the cloud. So there you go.
Right.
Also, hi, David.
Hey, Dave,
Hi,
you got
Andrew.
any thoughts on adding or just saving and loading game data? We're talking a little bit about databases, text format, text serialization, and binary. You got anything else?
I covered that stuff perfectly, so I don't need to go over that bit. But good job. No, the thing I would bring up is a lot of times when you see people starting out, they will make a mono behavior or they'll make a script that goes and grabs all the stuff that it has. Oh, player, I need this, this, and this, and I'm going to save that to the file. When you're making a save system, do yourself a favor and use interfaces and use attributes and stuff like that for your classes. Don't make one class that literally looks at each object and says, right, this is the player. I need this, 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 chuck that into the file. This is the scene. I need this. Have it so that things register. So they say, right, okay, I'm at savable data or something like that. And then those have functions in them that say, right, this is the stuff that I'm going to provide for the saving. It's so much more extensible than basically going into a giant class and going, right, okay, now I need to save all the trees. Right, okay, scene, trees, save this, save that. So make sure you're making your games extendable by using interfaces and attributes.
That makes sense. Then you just write some code to auto find all of those, right? I think you've probably done quite a few videos on that, is my guess.
No.
On using interfaces and finding them all and doing something with them?
Yeah, I mean, there are interfaces and attributes. Yeah, you can find those videos on my thing. I haven't done anything on save data. Somebody else asked me that. It's something that comes up a lot.
That might be a good one to do on using the interfaces for that save data and show a really simple way to do it, because it'd be a useful system, and it actually might tie into this question. Any insight into script selling asset store business? And maybe you could write it and then sell it on the asset store as a save system.
I am not touching that with a barge pole. I'll leave that to Andrew. I don't need the support hassle of having something on there that I have to go and everybody asks me questions and all that. I'm like, I've got a day job. I can't do this. No,
it's totally unsupported.
Yeah, it's totally unsupported. Use at your own demise. Yeah, no, people don't read that bit of the text. They just go, "Oh, it's totally unsupported. I'm going to ask a question about support." No, I haven't. I know people keep asking me to put things up on the store or put the code in with the videos, and I'm like, I'm not doing that because you'll just ask me more questions. Watch the video, copy and paste. Yeah, no, I mean, it's in short, it's a relatively simple thing to learn interfaces and start using them for this sort of stuff. Knowing that when you put certain objects on, they should register themselves as a savable object with a mastermind of a master class that's going to run through them, or a master class that's going to look over them upon the save system, do whatever's optimized for your system. Learning that stuff and learning how attributes work will save you a ton of time. It makes you clever, makes you smart and faster. And yeah, you won't be messing around a lot.
Yeah.
So the question that popped up, I think the answer to it is just yes. But it says by using interfaces, you mean using .NET Reflection to find all the savable things, and then maybe
that's the attributes bit. The savable thing is just an interface. So if you're using attributes, like you stick an attribute above a variable and say this is the one to be saved, this is the one to be saved, then that's going to use some reflection in there. But you can set a lot of that in the registering and all the rest. So when a thing comes onto the scene, or you're just starting up your scene, you can have a player object or something that has some savable data that can register itself with a master class that's doing the saving and say, I'm savable. I send myself across to you to be saved when we save, and then that will look through and go, yeah, that savable still there and saved. Again, this varies on whether you're doing a lot of stuff coming together. The last thing you want to do is be doing loads of reflection during runtime, because that's not a good idea. You're going to be costing yourself a fortune. Try and get those things out of the way ahead of time by doing them in awakes and starts that are happening at the very beginning of the loading of the level, etc.
Yeah, so just to add on that, generally speaking, if you're doing a register system, register once. And once everything is registered, try to reduce any amount of search steps. Attributes do nothing on their own. They are markers for other things to find. And if you are doing finding, then it's a slow process, or rather, it's an extra process over not doing finding. What you can do is interfaces are just a matter of casting. You have an object that you know is out there, and you can ask, does it have this interface? If it does, let me access that method, the save method. So the attributes bit is to speed up your time as a developer to have more convenient paths to cutting down boilerplate. But the interfaces are there for functionality, the stuff that you actually need. The core context of this thing needs to be saved, and it has data that you must know about. Reflection isn't an overkill for games. It depends on how much and how you use it. We use reflection in Terraria to, for example, find all the IDs of items that we have. We load it once, never again. It's a small, tiny process because it only looks at one class, just a small amount of fields. And then we have access to everything we need, no reflection involved. The reflection is just to find the thing. After you found it, you can access whatever you need without the reflection. It's an important distinction. And I wanted to bring it up earlier, but I didn't have a chance. Saving actually has multiple topics that have to be covered to have a full comprehension. And the first is what you want to save. Second is how you want to save it. Third is where you want to save it to. And every single one of them can have vastly different answers. And the short gist is you can literally swap every single part out and put another part in, and even combine some parts, and it's still going to work perfectly fine if you know what you're doing. Now, I wanted to bring this up specifically in Unity because what you want to save is a very big question, because you can't save a scriptable object. You don't know what type a scriptable object is when you save it, unless you provide that type, something that doesn't happen by default. This is where a lot of pitfalls happen. If you spawn 10, gems on the floor at runtime, and you want to save those 10 gems, you don't have a guarantee that what you're saving is a gem unless you tell the saving system somehow you are saving a gem. And that can be done in so many ways and has so many pitfalls. So I wanted to hear your opinion on that.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, sorry, I'm away with the fucking furries here. Sorry for swearing. So when you do the iSavable system, you can tell the thing that's doing the saving itself what the type is when it's coming across. And then when it comes back, that knows where to send it. So is it the pooling system that it's being pulled out of, that it comes out of when you're putting up gems? You should be using a pooling system if you're using a lot of drop gems and stuff like that. Then it knows to spawn. And if they're at a certain location and you're saving that off into a certain location, then you'll be taking in the transform data as well, and you'll be doing a set position rotation when it comes out to the point of where it comes out from. Now, with that iSavable, just to make it clear, yeah, the reflection system is one thing, and yeah, you can use that as much as you want, but your iSavable system has a save and a load, and or populate, or whatever you want to call it. Again, it really depends on the type of game you're doing. And then that will basically provide those details of where it's going to, what it's going to come out of, and all the rest. Maybe your pool manager is performing some of the save because you're spawning it in the pool manager. The pool manager goes, I just spawned this there, but that knows what its location is, etc. So again, run down the type of game you're running to actually do it.
Yeah. Just to get into a bit of more of the nitty-gritty of it, you have to tell a save system what you're saving. And how you do it changes a lot. I mentioned JSON saving earlier. JSON saving doesn't know about advanced types. You can tell it that it can try to figure out advanced types, and then it's going to actually write the full path to the type. You know the method getType? That one actually has a full path that has the namespace, the version, everything needed to find the exact type. And this is a huge security concern if you're using that system. Because if somebody opens up the save file, they can actually change the type being saved. Or if you have that system enabled and you do some simple saving, somebody can add a value with a type that you weren't aware of, and they can start doing a lot of malicious things. So there is a big line in the sand, a distinction between save systems that figure out what they're saving and game systems where save systems where you provide the type yourself and you have to, so that none of that can happen. If you make a restricted type allowed list, you can mitigate such issues.
Yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of things to look at. And as you build your games, you'll find people trying to hack them to bits. I remember making a game where we saved your current state of what you owned and everything in your little in-app purchases and all the rest. But some of these things had dates associated with them, and as time passed, you got extra boosts or you got certain other stuff, and then people would just go into the Android system and start tweaking the date on the Android system to make it so that they would get more stuff, and then that would save off, and then they'd put the date back. And that's such an annoyance, a pain in the ass to fix. But yeah, everybody's going to try and hack your saves. Don't think they're not going to, because they will. It might be a fun little mini game as well.
To VVIMM, JSON is good only for modding. You should save everything in binary if you can. It loads faster. The load time adds up as the game grows. There are a lot of things to unpack here. First off, it's not only good for modding, it's good for user readability and interactivity. I mentioned earlier that for a config file that isn't big, it's not something that's going to grow to such a massive extent with the game that's going to ever be a problem. It's fine to use a JSON file. This is something that users may want to edit, or you may want to share with them and see it clearly. It's not only for modding. Secondly, the faster loading is definitely there, and it's also a smaller transport size. There is no denying that. But you are way more prone to having issues in serialization and not being able to figure out what went wrong when you use a binary serialization system. Because all you're going to see is numbers, and you read them by the amount. They have no meaning because you're only saving values. If anything gets saved wrong, a single byte in a single space can ruin an entire save file, and you are at the responsibility of figuring out where something went wrong. This is a very big difference in terms of convenience for you as a developer to choose to use a binary serializer as opposed to a JSON serializer. And the most important thing here, which Jason Story would have said had he been here, is that it shouldn't matter what kind of serializer you're using for your data. You should be able to swap them in and out, ideally.
Yeah, I usually start with JSON and then switch it over later on. Heck, did somebody
Oh,
say
you've
JSON?
invoked him.
I hope so.
You have to say it 3 times though.
Yeah.
Make him
In
a
a mirror.
Sorry, Jason Story, come over here already.
So there are a bunch more questions, but I wanted to see if Andrew's got anything you want to talk about or share real quick before we jump into some more of these.
All I have are ads for the Black Friday sale and my stuff on sale right now. Other than that, I've got nothing new. I haven't been able to focus on any game development stuff, but I'm still working on quests and other fun stuff. And saving is always a part on my mind. I'm listening to you guys thinking, okay, I'm doing that. Oh, how do I do that? So
what are you
I'm always
doing for
learning
saving now? What's your current
right
saving?
now? Yeah, so right now in Legend of the Stones, it's a big RPG, so there's a lot of data to be saved. Part of it is I need to go back and figure out what things I don't need to save, right? And I need to specify the exact things I need to save and ignore the rest, and that's going to be a task for me. But in general, I try to save, all the different stuff, all the player data, all the location data for the scene itself, whatever environment, whatever level I'm in, the enemy positions. If there's particles in the air, right, I want to save where those particles are, where they're going, and their status. The loot boxes, so treasure chest or other things that have loot in them, if that's already been created. It doesn't, for my game, it doesn't create what's in the box until somebody tries to look in the box. It's very much a Schrodinger's situation, I think. But once somebody looks in that box and then closes it, it needs to stay the same. So I need to save that. So I used JSON right now, and each class gets serialized into JSON itself, and then those get put into the master save file. So each loot box will have its own JSON, and that's saved. And each player has its own JSON, that's saved. So the actual save file is just a whole bunch of JSON. I don't know what you call it, structures
Objects?
or whatnot. Objects, yeah. And then when I load it, I go the backward process, and each one will load its own data.
Yeah. Just to be clear about the entire usage of JSON that we keep mentioning here, JSON doesn't actually have any special significance in this context of saving here. It's just a very convenient library for formatting how values should be saved and loaded. If you are just using a TXT file, as somebody asked in the comments, there is no guarantee that you're using a specific format. JSON is a format that is well known, therefore it's going to be easy to interpret. There are many interpreters for JSON, both for saving and for loading. So you can open it up and in any common library that has that format and use it. If you use text, there is no format. You can write whatever you want, but you are at responsibility to know how to read it afterwards.
A little other tip, be able to save in ASCII and binary if you're doing it, because when you're debugging your saving system, it's really easy if you could just flip a switch and say, okay, save out to ASCII as well, because then you could go read it and go, okay, yeah, I see where I screwed up. Just a little tip there.
So there was a comment here. I'm going to drop story in here in 1 second as soon as it's ready. There was a comment that said JSON is bloat, just parsed from a text file. You can easily parse the file line by line in C#. You certainly can, but JSON helps when as soon as that data changes. It's like you change that data without having to rewrite and modify your saving system, and you don't have to write all of that code. I think saving line by line is a lot more likely to just break. I don't know. I assume you guys agree. Jason.
Hi there. Another
Howdy.
Jason for the Jason talk.
You can't say JSON that many times without me showing up. It has to happen.
They were saying JSON, not Jason.
Oh, okay.
I'll kick him out.
Oh, okay, I'll leave then.
No.
Fix this
It's
camera.
the better. It has a whole extra letter. Yeah.
Make him big.
I think the thing I like about the JSON is it is easily readable. So when I'm debugging the game, it's much easier to I can change a value, right, and say, okay, I want to give myself more health or something in the save file, so I can try something out or whatever. It also there's easy reader, so you can parse it out just by copy and pasting. And as Jason's story would advise, your save system should be agnostic to exactly how you save. So if later I want to, if I want to change the save system later, I should be able to do that if I've done it well, which I probably didn't, but in theory I did.
Yeah, I'd say the arguments for or against JSON, there is arguments against using JSON, but the arguments aren't the ones that people are saying. The arguments for not using JSON is a structured data format, which means it is like a jigsaw puzzle where you need all of the pieces to read the image. You can't just read line 5 of a JSON. Well, you can, but it's not valuable. You're not going to get useful information because you need to have the structure of the system. So there is value in reading something in a streamed format. So if you're dealing with data where you want it to come from a source and process it bit by bit as it arrives, like messages or something like that, then sending it as a big bundle of JSON makes no sense, right? Or items, if you have millions of items, you don't want to have to store a million items in memory by unpacking a million things in a giant JSON file and then reading the results. You want to be able to hold an index, and all you have to store is the index and then walk 10 more, add 10 in memory, and then move 10 more. And so there is reasons against using JSON for certain things. But in terms of as a data store, you can store a million records in a JSON file and still be fine for most things. It's as good as anything else. And I would say the problem I have with this conversation where people talk about it as a system is it's not really meant to be a store. A lot of this stuff is a means of, interfacing. That's what you were kind of talking about before, is that a good system can save into and out of any format. It doesn't really matter. It's an interface abstraction. The example I was using in my own Discord recently was I was using a to-do list application. I was using Marvin. I didn't want to use Marvin anymore. I wanted to switch to Todoist, and I didn't really know which way I wanted to go. I was kind of making up my mind. So I made a simple to-do application. It's a console app, and I didn't save anything, and I didn't do anything. It was just in console, I had an object called to-do, and I wrote to-do items into it. It couldn't save. It didn't load anything. It disappeared when I pressed stop. It was a console application. But then I said, what if I have it saved to JSON? So I did. And then I said, what if I have it saved to text file? So I did. Then I said, what if I read from Marvin? So I did. And I had, what if I read to Todoist? And so I did that. And so these are all unrelated to the concept of there is a thing. It has to-do list items. I can put them somewhere. I can get them from somewhere. I can add things to it. I can then save them again. I can load them again. And so if you're thinking about JSON as this intrinsic structural part of your system, you're doing it wrong. That's not what it's for. It should be a thing that it's an easy to read communication system that if you want to talk to someone else, it's infinitely easier to send them something that they can use an automatic generator, build a model out of, and interact with really comfortably, rather than sending them some really fancy custom text format. But it's as good as anything else. So again, it seems like it's an unnecessary amount of complexity. I would regularly use a JSON database for a while, and then when things start to get too big, I would make something that can read my database, put it in memory, make a SQLite database, and then just move the entries in, and then switch to that, right? You don't have to solve every problem all at once. JSON is as good a tool as anything else. So yeah, it's not it seems silly to argue over the semantics of whether JSON is good or bad. It is a tool like anything else,
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think. Oh, go ahead, Yorai. You wanted to answer a question that popped up.
Yeah, but before that, I just want to say, excellent answer, Jason Story. And I do want to bring up that even if JSON is popular, just to nail down the point, it's not something that you have to use at all. And there are formats that are now superseding it. YAML became popular to the point that, for example, Unity is using it to serialize your files. So I just wanted to bring that up to everybody who
But
want
please
to
don't
do
use
more.
YAML. I hate YAML. Don't use.
Yeah, YAML can be a bit difficult to handle at times. So in regards to the question about how to make pixels not shake when scrolling textures in OpenGL, in the comments, I do not know what your question pertains to exactly, but I'm going to assume the problem is in this. And what you're looking at here is there certain ways that you can sample pixels when working in any application that you're on. And by default, a lot of games are going to assume that you're going to want to use bilinear filtering because it looks smooth, and games in 3D tend to want to have smoothness to the point that you cannot see pixels. Changing this to point sampling is going to give you a more crisp look, but the problem with pixel sampling is that when you have an object and it is scaled up or down, every single pixel on your screen is going to capture different points on the actual object. And it's not going to be points that exactly match the size of the object. If it's rotated, you don't know if you're out of the diagonal or in the diagonal of every single pixel in it. So what happens is there are multiple techniques to figure out which color you want to draw. And the more precise the techniques, the more jagged differences are going to look between small movements. Point sampling only captures one pixel. So if you're inside a box or outside the box, you're going to see an immediate you have color or you don't have color. But it's going to be an instant shift. And that sometimes doesn't look very well, especially when you have a rounded thing and it has a corner, and only one pixel is going to be grabbed for that one corner, but the others are like not there. So you're going to have like a spike coming out, something that comes up very often when you use point sampling. In contrast to that, bilinear filtering is going to grab multiple points and try to figure out how to smooth out what you're seeing so that the problem is less pronounced. Try looking into that. That might make things way easier for you to have a smooth scrolling bit in your game. One thing you have to watch out for is that now you are in the responsibility of making sure that everything else is landing just right. Because if you're on the half point, then you're going to have this blurry look on the edges. Nobody wants to see that. One thing that Terraria does a lot to get around that problem, by the way, is that when we call draw code, we actually floor down the values before we send them to the sprite batch of Terraria. And that gets us like a crisp look at every single step.
So there was a super chat that came in earlier that I pinned it and totally forgot about. So I wanted to jump back to it real quick, see if anybody's got some thoughts on it, especially now that the story showed up. So it says, can you elaborate on scriptable objects being intended for static data? Most tutorials use them for player stats or events, which isn't static data. And we were talking a little bit about the Code Monkey video that came out yesterday, where you were showing how scriptable object data, if you use it in the editor, it'll serialize and kind of work as save data. But as soon as you go to a build, that falls apart because it's no longer reserializing that data at runtime. So we were briefly talking about that, but then we talked about it being more for static and non-changing data. But you guys anybody want to jump in on this and give a little bit of thought?
I guess I can if nobody wants to come up. Yeah. Okay.
Go for it.
Yeah. So the intention with static data is not quite what the actual statement is derived from. The source of why we say this is that when you have an asset, you don't want unpredictable changes to that asset. And unpredictable change can only happen if there is change. So if you have something referencing a piece of data and it changes its values, you have to guarantee that it's not going to be your asset. Scriptable objects are assets. So if you start editing their values, they will stay when you exit your play mode, and that can introduce undesired state. So you become responsible of managing that state. And this is something that a lot of people don't want. You want to grab stuff from the scriptable object without any risk that that stuff becomes corrupt. You don't want the starter sword in the game to suddenly have 999 damage because the player enchanted it in one gameplay session, and the next time they load and you're starting a fresh new game, and oh look, the starter weapon does 999 damage. So the problem is change happened without you addressing resetting state, and that created an undesired result. So just don't make the change, you won't have the problem.
I can give you a literal example of this in a project I worked on where it was like a VR app with a sign-on. So there's a PIN code you have to type in, and the PIN code was using Scriptable object behind the scenes to sort of save whatever they've typed in. Now, in a real application, perfectly fine. You run the app, it saves it, it uses an in-memory thing, and then Photon or whatever would check that against stuff and do what it needs to do. But if you're testing it in the editor and you type in a PIN code and then stop running, it keeps that number in that scriptable object in the editor. And so when you make a build and you forgot to clear out that field on the build, you will have built the typed PIN code into the application as opposed to what you probably intended. There's a lot of other kind of aspects to this too, but I think the general takeaway is just I look at scriptable objects as like a box on your desk, and it's like working memory. And so I always use the bookshelf example. There's books behind me, and if I want to reference something in the book, it's a lot of both mental and physical exertion to go across over there, scroll through the list of books, grab one, open it to the right page, pick a line I want, get the information I want, bring it back, and then put it all back and do it again. Now, if I know I'm going to be accessing that data regularly and changing it, like I'm rewriting it or underlining it, I don't want to keep putting it back on the shelf. So I have a close part of this that I put the book here and I work with it while I'm doing things. And then when I'm done, I put it back on the shelf. So the shelf in this case is your save file. You don't want to be reading to and from your save file all of the time. What you want is a scriptable object or something similar that acts as your little box beside you, that stuff can be read, moved, iterated really fast. But that's not where it lives. That's where it is temporarily while you work on it. And then when you're ready, you take that and you save it back on shelf. And that way, when you start the game the next time, you load it up from there, save it into the scriptable object, put it back in the box beside you, and everything works smoothly. So that's usually what I think most of us here use a scriptable object for, with the caveat, because I always feel like I have to give this caveat. A lot of people think this is conflicting information, but it isn't. Number one rule above all else is use what works. And the second rule is do it as simply as possible. And if you're doing a small project, a scriptable object might actually do 85 to 90% of what you need. So it is not conflicting or contrasting information to say don't do that. We're saying it's usually fine until it isn't. The difference might be when you would decide it's not fine. And all of us might have different degrees of that. I would probably say not fine sooner than most here, but I still think we'd all probably say fine for a while until such time as it makes more sense to scale out to something else. So you can use it for more, but the truth is it's not really what it's for, and you will end up biting the cost of this later. And the number one thing, in my opinion, to keep an eye on is decisions like these don't cost you money at the start, or money or time. What they cost you is time later when they compound. So a small problem at scale starts to become a bigger issue. If you have to change reset one or two bits of information, it's annoying, but you can do it. But if you add one other team member, they have to know to do it. Or you add two more scriptable objects, they have to know to do it, and they have to know to do it on all three objects. And so there's a point where that starts to steamroll, and all of a sudden you find yourself having a workflow that's exhausting and confusing, and everything breaks for no reason. So the point is, when do you curb that? When do you decide that it's time to make that change? And the phrase I always use is contracts. If you build your application around a contract where you just draw a line and say stuff goes in, something happens for saving, stuff comes out, I use it, you can make that decision later, and you're not having this ripple effect. It doesn't scale with complexity for each new thing added. It only has to change at that one boundary line. So that's what a boundary line does. It's not that you're not writing the complicated solution. You're giving yourself a place with which when the time comes to change it to something bigger or better or different, it's a simple change. So you don't have to solve it. You just have to make sure that when the time comes to solve it, you've given yourself the easiest way to do it.
Absolutely.
And you can always just basically make a copy of that scriptable object if you want to change it, but you don't want to save it. There's create instance and all the rest of it. So yeah.
Yeah, just to hammer down that point, Unity does that themselves. I mentioned earlier in the stream that the animator component relies on an animator controller scriptable object, and that inside has state machine behavior scriptable objects. And these are not shared, they are instanced. So if you have two objects that use the same type of animator controller, they each will have their own instance of the state machine behavior that you put inside that controller. And that state machine behavior instance can hold whatever references it needs, that it grabs them probably at runtime, and use them for whatever purpose. And this lets you do quite a lot and easily, as long as you guarantee that you're not changing the original asset and causing yourself problems down the line. Materials in Unity are also scriptable objects, assets in a sense. And when you use the .material field inside Unity on any renderer, it's actually giving you a copy of the material because it doesn't want you to edit the original material that's going to exist outside.
And if you want to break your project, here's a fun thing for you to do. In your onValidate function, write renderer.sharedMaterial equals anything, and watch as you'll freak out as all of your settings change, and then it saves those changes at editor time, and you'll have damaged all of the settings you would have had. So yeah, that's why it's not shared material is the shared version, and material is the instance one.
And something that a lot of people don't know is because Unity protects you from harming your project by making you an instance of a material when you access those material fields in the renderer, sorry, properties in the renderer, is that you are now responsible for disposing them, which is something that a lot of people fall down to, and it's just allocating memory and garbage everywhere.
And
Which is
also
where the whole
people
property
look at
block
it-
thing comes in, and yeah.
Yeah, and people use it in the wrong place, and suddenly they're making tons of them.
Seen that happen a lot. So there was a super chat that came in that I think Andrew would be perfect at answering. He hasn't said anything for a few minutes, so I want to read it out loud. It says, "I'm no good at making graphics," which is just like me. "How do you handle different asset packs which don't all flow seamlessly together, such as color scheme or different numbers of polygons?" And I know Dave does this a lot really well too. But Andrew is kind of my asset master. So I was curious, you got some thoughts on this? And then I also wanted to show real quick your stuff that's on sale.
Yeah, the stuff is on sale. Yeah, so I mean, I saw this question. My first thought was, well, how important is it? And this is to say, there's, you know, if you're buying stuff from the asset store, you're gonna get stuff that doesn't always look perfectly together. Like if you buy Infinity PBR stuff and you buy Protofactor stuff, they work pretty well together. But I'm sure if you went through with a fine-tooth comb, you could be like, hey, the average poly count's different, the texture resolution is different, there's some stylistic things just from, you know, the aesthetic of the art or the artist who made them. And of course, I work with multiple artists, so even among my own stuff, you're going to find some packs that might be slightly different than others in various ways due to the modeler or the texture artist who did those things, or even the animator when it comes down to the animations. My thing is, I am a bit of a perfectionist, and I've had to teach myself to stop. To when I'm building a project it's essentially a prototype. Yes, I intend to ship my game eventually, but at this point, what I'm doing is prototyping my game out. I like to see things pretty. I like to see things match, but I also have to teach myself to, you know, I'm not going to mix Cinti stuff with the Infinity PBR high fidelity stuff. But if things don't look perfectly aligned, okay, deal with it for now. Now, how to actually fix that in the end? Well, the easiest solution with all the money in the world is to create your own art, which I think a lot of folks want to do anyways. Once you get funding, once you get Kickstarter, once you get some sort of revenue coming in, hire an artist and just pump out your own custom artwork. How to deal with it in the meantime? Load up Photoshop, load up Substance Painter, and you can change the colors. You can modify things to get that, you know, more an aesthetic that you like. There's some shader options. You can create a shader just to kind of like if something's too saturated, create a shader that brings down the saturation a little bit and just gets a better mix there. Same with the hue. You can just shift that a little bit if something's, for some reason, everything's too blue in this set or whatever. That's where I'd start with the looks. I don't know on the polygons how to handle that besides just making LODs that just fit better if that is an issue. But
Honestly, I'm sure you'd agree with me on this one, is for the average layperson who's not like really micro paying attention to every detail in your game, the secret weapon, whether you're doing video editing, whether you're doing game development, whether you're doing Photoshop art, post-processing is a magic button that makes everything cohesive all of the time. There's a lot of stuff that you can do on top of that, but at the end of the day, no matter what you've got, if it's all washed with roughly the same look and color, people will forgive a lot of things. And so that's not to say just use post-processing, but the philosophy behind what that means is if you put something cohesive over the top, all the details melt away. And so I'm not just talking about literally post-processing, but the same goes for textures, filters, and all sorts of color matching. So you could take every asset you've got from different packs, open them all in Photoshop, pick the same filter, take the same color palette, put them all on it, and a lot of the details about model differences and things will suddenly disappear because they'll all quickly match together. Then put a matching LUT over the top of it, have it matched roughly color-wise, and that's 80% of the problem. And then after that, you can just pay artists to fix whatever things are glaringly popping out as being different or mismatched. So honestly, like, people focus on this too much. The problem isn't using assets. The problem isn't assets being not all matching. The problem is people using assets exactly as they are and being very recognizably so. If you take any asset and you put a different texture on it, you will already have removed most of the stigma of it being an asset. And if you do the same as the other assets in your game, you will have solved 80% of the it not matching problem. So honestly, until you're at that stage, until you already have everything matching roughly, don't stress about it. And only wait till you're at the like nearly release stage of the game to start worrying about those kinds of problems.
David, do you want to take it before I have a take, or?
Sure, I just fixed them.
Yeah, okay, fair.
Fucking Dave.
What? Dude? Like,
Yeah,
no, I mean,
Dave would
it's-
probably just open up Maya and go in there and
Yeah,
change it. We're
I
like,
mean-
all right, now it matches.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, before post-process or anything like that, I mean, Jason's right on this. But before that, I just get them as close as possible to what else there is. I also don't mix polygon worlds with real 3D looking worlds and all the rest, because that's, well, you can, but why? Unless your game is specifically like that, because you have a memory filter or something where the guy goes into his memory and everything's in polygon world, it's in real 3D. Good stuff. There you go. Just gave you a game idea. But no, I would say that there's a good reason to learn a few extra tricks, like learning a bit of Photoshop, learning a bit of Blender, learning a little bit of that. You don't need to be a master in all those things to change small aspects of those things. If you're going to have to reskin a character or something like that, then it comes with much more learning to get to that point to be able to do that sort of thing. But if you've got a generic asset and you just need to, like, there's a trash can that doesn't quite fit with other things in the world, knowing a little bit of Blender, knowing a little bit of Photoshop and how that stuff works will make you a better developer anyway. But yeah, from myself, I know how to do 3D modeling. I know how to do texturing and all the rest. I go and fix those things and then I pop them out. Sorry.
Yeah.
Not sorry.
It was a good answer. So I guess I'll have a take here, and I'll say, before all the assets, before learning to use tools that are paid, before trying to go for anything else, remove the wrongs. And I'm going to take this in steps, but even if you start with a blank canvas, nothing is wrong, so the art doesn't look off. If you add a single circle there, it still looks perfectly serviceable. The only problem happens is when people notice something that should not be there. And that usually happens due to juxtaposition of things that don't match together. For example, low poly characters and a high poly dragon with all the textures in the world. If you remove the wrongs, if you have a cohesive scene, as Jason said, then there won't be a problem, and it's going to be way easier for you to make something serviceable. Post-processing does that because post-processing manipulates information and loses some of it. The raw information that you put in the scene that you're showing is what you control. You can remove as much as you want of it with post-processing, or you can do it without. The result will be the same if you have a cohesive scene without bad juxtaposition. Now, what do I actually mean? If you have a low poly pack, say Cinti, and you drop it all together, it looks pretty good because it's Cinti pack. But even if you removed all the color and made all the units pure black and the background pure white, it's still going to be perfectly serviceable because the shapes are pretty okay. If you make a certain shape giant so that if you're looking at the tip of its foot, it still looks like a mountain, you won't be able to tell this is a proper shape. It's going to look like some landscape or something. And if it doesn't look in the same amount of polygons per area of vision, then it's going to look off. The shapes matter, the assets, the silhouettes, the distance from you, the viewer, to the asset is something that happens a lot in 3D vision that throws people off, because trying to discern perspective, trying to see visual lighting that's modeled after reality is difficult if you don't have the assets for it. But if you eliminate these details, then you can have something that works. So I just wanted to stress that. As for color schemes and almost anything, you can find a lot of easy tools on the internet that can be perfectly serviceable for release values without any problem. There is the Photoshop Color Picker website. There are tons of websites that just generate perfectly serviceable color palettes that you can copy paste the color values from at no cost and have a perfectly nice visual gameplay in minutes. Jason, you made a tool that literally just drops that in for you, right?
Yeah, 100%. You're right. Basically, for all my talk about color stuff is I'm not good at it. I've no artistic talent whatsoever. But what I am good at is reading things online, following guides, and then writing code that does that, follow the guide for me. And so I just learned the very basics of how color theory works. And it's like, well, if you have this for dark background, you're going to need this kind of lightness above it. And if you're going to pick this kind of color, it's probably wanted to be triadic to match the other two, so there's enough contrast. And you learn a few things. And I made something that lets me go online, pick 3 colors, put it in a thing, and it will generate a dark and light theme for me and the matching colors, and lighten and darken the colors appropriately, so that I just know, pick this one for the foreground, this one for the background, and things will look okay. And if I want to change the colors, it'll match up later. Although, to your point, for all my talk about colors and post-processing and all that stuff, what I actually do when I start a project is exactly what you were describing, which is live in the land of silhouettes. I will download all the assets I have with like large rocks and trees and things, and I will delete their textures and their materials, and I will just put them in the scene. And the magic button that, like, if you've never done anything with visual stuff in a 3D project before, just put some shapes in and it looks horrible. But then add ambient occlusion and suddenly it looks amazing, because the difference between 2 shapes with no distinct differentiation, with that little bit of darkness at the edges, suddenly brings it to life. So honestly, I don't think of all this color stuff at the outset. I'm just telling you that's how you make it cohesive to solve that problem. But the truth is, I will just put boxes, rectangles, pro builder shapes, get some generic rocks and trees, put them all in a space. I will put a light post-processing so it's tinted slightly warmer, because I find that makes it more compelling as a space. A little bit of fog so that it like makes the background have depth. And then I just put ambient occlusion out the wazoo, and it's great. Already everything will just look really nice. You can then layer on textures and add details and add colors and figure out what style you want to go for, and add bloom to make it look dreamier, or make it darker if you want to add it grungier later. You can do all that stuff later, but it will work and it will look good, and you'll be able to focus on the details if you remove the details first and then do exactly as what Uri was saying and just focus on the general shape, the composition, and the scene. So all that color stuff does come later.
And another thing, if you do want to use multiple asset packs that don't work well together, just don't put them together. There are many games that will have multiple display modes for different portions of the game. For example, many map conquest type games will have a literal map 2D plane just showing you points that you can conquer. You can pick one. Your character will show as a 2D icon. That there are plenty of icon packs out there. And if you click, you enter a map that there is a 3D model. And you can do that in different types of presentations even if it's not just 2D and 3D, you can do a low poly map with Cinti assets that's just showing conquest values, and then you enter, and it's suddenly HD dragons from Andrus packs. The idea being that as long as there is a separation between things that don't match and a scene only contain things that match together, you're not going to have any visual problems. There are so many games out there that use chibi art and then grotesque whatever you want characters to show emotional scenes with no issues whatsoever. Nobody judges because it fits in the context of what you're seeing at every given point in time, but not together.
Yeah, and if you want like the most obvious telltale sign of why things tend to look bad in a lot of junior games, in my opinion, is because what makes things look cohesive is all of that, the shadows and contouring, which usually comes from lighting. And what ambient occlusion is it's faking that lighting. But where things tend to go wrong, if you're just mashing asset packs together, is there's two completely different workflows for dealing with light. You might go realistic and PBR and expect stuff to actually react to light, or you might go cartoony and bake the lighting into the textures or not care about light at all. And so the thing that tends to be the jarring difference between two things just not working at all is when you're using things like trees and fences that were designed to have a real light on them, and they're dark and they're detailed. And then you put a character who is magically lit by something that you can't see because the light is baked into the texture of the character, and they're just walking around a scene, not reacting to the world around them. And there's a massive disconnect in the lighting. So normally that's what's actually visually wrong, is the lighting is fundamentally different between the types of things some of them are designed to be lit and some of them are not, or some of them are cartoony, because that's all cartoony really means in a lot of those cases. It means the colors and the shapes of it are designed in a certain way that it's lit differently, right? So yeah, that's why if you take the textures and stuff off of it and just let it all be ambient occluded, it'll already immediately feel better because you don't have that mismatch.
And one last thing, don't be afraid to learn, because you'll get 80% of the value from 20% of the learning time, and the tools available will speed up the process so much. You don't have to use anything paid. Just Google, if you have a problem with color, Google color picker or color selector or color sets. You'll find so many tools to just solve that problem for you. If you have problems,
there's even one called colorlover.com where you can type in a word like Mario and you'll find multiple palettes that look like Mario. It'll give you palettes that are themed around certain games or certain kinds of things. So like you can very easily steal palettes from brands, from companies, from other games. And there's other ones which lets you upload photos. There's one called, is it low spec color or something? That one's designed for pixel art games where you can upload images and it'll literally give you the palette of those images for the pixel part. So like there's so many ways to do this.
Yeah. Don't give up. It's easy. You can do it.
Andrew, you sent this over as an example of some of the stuff everybody was just talking about, right?
This is the Neon demo. This is years old now, probably 2017 that Unity put this out. I think when Post-Processing Stack 1 came out. And all of the content we're seeing here is from the asset store using Post-Processing Stack 1. And if you read the blog, it goes into detail about how they use each thing. But what's really neat is like there's a wall on the left by that gas sign that's actually the top of a building from the asset store. Some building was put on its side, scaled differently, and now it's a wall. The awning above the bar is a spaceship from the asset store, which is just a giant spaceship that's, you would think, based on its marketing, that is meant to be in space, but they've put it on top of a bar, so now it is the awning above bar. Right at this point in the video, it's going to focus on a car in a trash heap. Somewhere in that trash heap right here where your mouse is, it's going to come down and focus on this car. This car is a toy car here. It's on the top of a trash heap, and it's a toy car. But if you look at the asset package they used, it's this Toon car that, from the marketing images, appears to be some low poly, simple, casual game car that you would never use in a sci-fi dystopian city. But what they did was make it really small, put it on a trash heap, and now it's a toy car. And it looks perfect as a toy car. So I think this just shows a really good use case of, putting assets together that probably don't work perfectly together, but using them in creative ways, and then adding the post-processing stack. A lot of fog, a lot of lighting, a lot of effects there in order to make it all work together and basically fool users into not really caring, what the wall is made out of, that the wall is a top of a building, and outside of that wall. There's a whole skyscraper going who knows how far to the left. They didn't remove it. Scene still works perfectly fine. Users don't know, but it's just really cool ways of using assets.
Kit bashing.
Essentially, yep. And what I think is really neat is I think all of us tend to be less creative than we probably hope we are, and this proved to me how much creativity I lacked by showing me things that I probably would not have thought to do if not having seen somebody else do it first. And I think that the cartoon car is, for me, the best example of just, oh yeah, I would never ever look for a cartoon car to use as a toy car, but it's perfect.
By the way, a last note on post processing: know your platform. If you go too mental on processing and you try and put it on a really crappy mobile device, yeah, you're gonna have a bad day.
Yeah, this is
You're
why
gonna
I
go back
started
to-
with removing details instead of adding them. Post-processing works at a cost. And on that note, lightning and fog always work because they are modeled very consistently for reality. But to show them is a heavy calculation. You can do everything by just removing detail instead of adding it. More detail means more things to process. Not for you, for the machine. So do we want to move to the next question, or?
Yeah, let's there were a few other questions I wanted to take real quick, and then a couple other things I wanted to talk about. First, this one's really quick and easy. When should you use a coroutine with a delay time versus an invoke with a time delay? So, or versus just writing your own timer, which I think is probably 90% of the time what you probably should do. So, anybody got a thought on this real quick?
I mean, I guess. So when you make a coroutine, you are making a routine. It's implied in the name, but it has a significance of sorts, which is you can do anything you want it to do, and until you say the routine is done, it's not done. It's meant for more... it can support more complex cases, but it doesn't have to. And it is boilerplatey to do it if you don't need to. The delayed invocation is literally the simplest form of, yeah, I just want this called later, please do that, without the boilerplate. There are some things that go under the hood, but this is like the intuition level of it.
Anybody else got a thought on this one?
You can do it on your start method.
Ooh. Yes, that's an important one. You can make it an I enumerator instead of void, and then just yield right there. I use that almost always instead of an invoke. And when it comes to coroutines for delaying and repeating and waiting on things, most of the time I'll do that if there's like one of them and I'm going to do some complex stuff in there. But as soon as I get to be, it's an object that there's a bunch of, I'll start to just write a timer. It's usually either in the update or controlled by something else that's keeping track of when this object should do its next thing instead of a coroutine for a bunch of them, because you don't want to spin up hundreds of coroutines. And if you got it on your bullet class or your enemy class and you have hundreds of enemies or something. So those are kind of like my defaults. Go ahead.
I'm going to put a caveat on that. Coroutines are not to be replaced with updates because updates always run, and coroutines will only run once you start them. If you have a script that doesn't have an update loop, but you need suddenly a process that takes time, that has to wait for stuff, a routine, then you can start it when you need it without having an update loop always consuming performance. Because that's a Unity method call that goes into the life cycle. That's if you're only going to use it after 10 minutes of the object being up, you've just wasted 10 minutes worth of updates. One thing that comes up a lot is units taking damage and dying. A damage taker component that has a die method, and when it is dying, it's going to play particles and wait until they're done and then despawn. That doesn't need an update method. That doesn't necessarily even need anything more than an event call, But if you want, you can have a die, start coroutine, play particles, wait 3 seconds, destroy object.
That's what I would default to there myself.
Yeah.
Do a little
I will say though, another option that sometimes you'll use it. I use it a lot for web-based stuff. Is you can do tasks in asynchronous as well. So do tween. Most people don't realize do tween. Every single tween can be marked as a task, and you can do it asynchronously as well. So if I'm having something where I'm like loading something from the internet, like a picture, and I want to like animate it in with do tween, and then I want to like have it fade up and then rotate and move to a position, I won't bother doing a coroutine. I will just do tasks, and I will do await, get data, await, do tween, move to position, await, do tween, fade, and then same thing.
Also, on that note, you can stack coroutines, and it's really awesome.
All right.
You
So
can also cancel them as well.
yes, kill them and cancel them. Keep a reference to them.
Yeah, only if
You can
keep
also
the
run them
reference.
manually. Another thing people don't realize, it's just got an is complete function. You can just not recall start a coroutine, and you can just iterate it yourself and check when it's done. It's another option.
You also
I-
don't have to create a new wait 4 seconds every time you do that. You can actually create that outside and then just use it.
You can
And
also
just
return
reuse
null.
Let's just keep adding little bits about them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although just to
The
know, when you say
origin
return
shell
null,
now.
that's as opposed to return 0, by the way. Don't return 0. Return null if you're returning.
All right. What is that? There were a couple other topics that I had. I'm trying to look through my list of stuff. Oh, so I don't know if you guys saw this email. I want to share it real quick. Let me pop this little post up. Where's my shared screen? I'll find it. It's one of my 300 tabs. There
The
it
only
is.
one with a tabs problem I see.
No,
yeah,
no,
some
I've got
serious tabs
a
problem.
bad tab problem. So I saw this pop up on Reddit this morning, and I was like, oh, this is a neat little like GIF version of or GIF version of how to juice up your game. I thought it was kind of a neat little one and kind of an interesting thing to talk about. Is they just kind of go through step by step. I think there's a video of this too, that showing just a couple of little things that they do to improve like the game. You know, it's got the same exact mechanics, but just improving it visually. And I know like Jason Story is really good at this kind of shit, and obviously Dave too. But have you guys seen this specific video? And do you guys have any thoughts or recommendations on other ones, or just ways to add juice into the game? Or anyone talk about it briefly?
You just
Certainly
opened
the-
like an ant's nest.
I think all these small movement things are so important, like the knockback, just the small little reaction to things. So something happens, there's a reaction. Something's reacting to things is in my mind just paramount. You know, just a little shake, just a little wiggle, just a little cause and effect.
Yeah, I think it's really. This was a really good example of it too. Go ahead, Yari.
Yeah, so I said it's an ant's nest because this is one of the infinite topics of gameplay. There is one thing that I dislike about this video, but I want to praise it first. So it does go through the steps in a very nice order, and it's showing it, and it started off very nicely visually without any part of the animation. Just the very basic necessity for gameplay and how to make that gameplay over time, the animation of what's going on, feel good. That's fantastic. That said, all of the changes here change the fundamentals of how the game was actually played. Adding knockback, adding recoil changes the mechanics. Increasing the shot speed changes the mechanics. You don't always have the leeway to do this just to feel good. And the is to feel good without doing this. Keeping the exact gameplay, but having a more appealing visual feedback and even audio feedback at times. How do I begin? The concept of appeal comes from seeing that your actions are executed as you wanted them to be executed, and as they get executed, they tell you every part of the way that the thing is happening. Sorry if my audio is breaking up, apparently. So what do I exactly mean? If you press a button and nothing happens, how do you know you pressed the button? Did you press it correctly? You don't know. If the button lights up or something else lights up, you're seeing a reaction. You're saying, oh, now I know the button was pressed successfully. But did it feel good? What do you need for something to be felt good? You have to notice it. There's one thing that a lot of games fail at, which is not showing enough of a response to an action that's taken. If a button changes color, but you can't notice the color change, for example, if it's a gradient, if it's a color of red, and it's a color of red just 1% less bright, you won't be able to notice it necessarily. You won't be able to know the feedback happen. If the color changes from red to green, you know that something happens. Green doesn't necessarily need to mean something that's good. You can have a plump, healthy boy, and then he's poisoned. This is green. Green can be bad. The association of the things you're using for feedback tells you if you've done something desirable or not desirable. Audio can be used to a great extent to tell you something good happened, something bad happened. If you make a hit against an enemy and there's the sound of the splorch of hitting skin, that means you dealt damage. But if there's the sound of metal, that could be the enemy deflected your attacks. All these little feedback things are useful because they're making you more aware of the state of what happens. And as you become more aware, you become more immersed in it. It's going to feel better. So let things react at every step of the way. The video about the shooting started off with a very basic spider drone shooting an enemy. Every step of the way there, from the moment that you press the button, to a muzzle flash, to a shot firing at whatever velocity that it wishes to fire, to the moment that it hits an enemy, to the choice of the enemy's reaction and the bullet's own change in behavior, to whatever the simulation is doing with the freeze frame or the screen shake, because the camera is watching this, it's also reacting. All of these are terms of feedback that's going to make you feel better. This is the juice, in a sense. And the light that comes from the bullet that it started off with, that should have been one of the steps, by the way, is also one of them. Because when light appears, it changes a drastic amount of your field of vision. The visual pixels you see immediately tell you, hey, something happened. Look. It's literally a cluster of attention, and you can use that to a great extent, but it also can be visual poison if you didn't invoke it and you didn't ask for it to be invoked. This is something that a lot of games get wrong, where they just spam flashy lights and then you lose your character in the whatever the hell is going on. And Sakurai, Masahiro Sakurai actually had a very great video about this with Super Smash Brothers, and showing how they tone down VFX so that they can always see the player, so there is clarity in the action. So yeah, just be very careful with what you're doing to not change mechanics or change them to be more fun as well. Things that are responsive are things that are fun. Slow shots like the start are not appealing. Fast shots that immediately hit the enemy are appealing because it's instant feedback for your action that you've taken. It's the same philosophy of trying to lose weight and taking months to see the stomach just going a tiny bit smaller versus eating a tasty treat and immediately getting the adrenaline rush, the sweet flavor, and whatever you have.
And Andrew,
after all, that's what games are, right? Like the entire point is games are interactive. That's literally the point. And so that buzzword of feedback is like the most important thing. 100% nailed it. A lot of people get that wrong, as you said. They just put effects on that are effects for the sake of effects. Effects should telegraph information. It's all ways of giving information. What just happened? Where are enemies? Where's the danger coming from? Did that succeed? Every visual feedback should be exactly that feedback.
You're not supposed to just throw in tons of particles just because they're pretty and I liked them on the video.
Screen shake. Just tons of screen shake to the point you can't watch what's going on.
Every time you step, it shakes.
You just got it. Yeah, oh yeah.
I actually, one of the first things I do in almost every game I play is I turn off screen shake and head bob. because I feel like they are intended distractors from the experience. They want you to feel like you're in the game more, but at the expense of seeing less of the game, and you just get to feel dizzy. I also have heavy motion sickness, so it doesn't help me at all. Um, I on the concept of on the point of screen shake, something to be very, very careful of is using it when you're not supposed to or inconsistently. Screen shake is something that says you, as the viewer, got affected. And to have that happen means something significant, usually. In a shooting game, it makes perfect sense because you are holding the gun, you get the recoil, yada yada. But if an explosion happens and it has a subtle screen shake, or a door opens and there is a screen shake and it's like a regular person opening the door, I don't get that one. I don't even remember which game it was. It was somewhere on the PS3, but I just stopped and stared, and I will let the door close and I opened it again. It was like, it's so weird. Make sure the feedback matches. It also is really important with audio. There are so many games that will just use the same audio for as much as they can, and that's good as long as this audio signals something. But if it doesn't, uh, it's just going to become visual noise, and you have no idea what is going on, and it's going to obscure all the other signals, and you're not going to get to hear the wonderful music that you prepared for your own game.
And don't forget haptics. Haptics are there, but use them sparingly, kind of like the screen shake. Don't turn haptics on and leave them on. The person will hate you for running down their battery in about 3 seconds.
Oh, and
My
for the love
favorite
of God, haptics, just one thing, because this is fascinating. So, it's kind of a tangent from games. This actually is a problem in industrial engineering and hardware stuff as well. So, video editing, I do video editing sometimes, and I use this thing. This is my personal favorite toy for video editing. It's called the Tour Box. But there's other products. I have other ones too. One of them is called the Loop Deck CT. And the reason I bring up the Loop Deck is the Loop Deck has haptics. It's like little touch screens, like a little Stream Deck. And when you touch the screen, it does a little buzz, right? Kind of, to indicate interaction. But here's what they've done. The button buzzes with the haptics when you press the button, regardless of what it does, if there's even an action assigned to it, which means that information is what you expect. The buzz is it did a thing. The thing has occurred. The action happened, but it's meaningless now. So not only is it not information, it is negative information because it'll give you false positives that stuff has happened. So it makes the app almost entirely useless because all of your instincts of what's happening isn't there. So haptics, as like the bounce on both of what was said, Yorai said it's about the whole point is feedback. And you just mentioned haptics as like don't turn on all the time. Literally, it has to be feedback. You use it to indicate something has occurred. That's what it's for.
Yeah,
Just
to strain on that a little bit, when you're shooting a gun, for instance, if you've got a big laser beam cannon weapon thing, yeah, you started shooting it, turn on the haptics, but don't run it for the entire time the gun is firing because you've just got to think about the people's batteries. Like you are literally running it down. The other one I hate is when there was somebody was showing me an app they were creating. It was a painting app in VR. And when you started painting, it turned on the haptics. It's like, no, I'm trying to be accurate. Stop hapticking me all the way across. Like, yeah, just a point to clarify. You're right. Go on.
Yeah. Two things about this. First off, the point of duration, there is the concept of numbing people to certain signals. And to keep them from being numbed, you try to use the signals sparingly. What do I mean? Just like you just described, if you have the feedback through the entire duration of using something that you plan to use for long, for a major portion of the game, it's going to become noise. You already internalized that the action is happening through the other mediums. You don't need this one as well. It could be spared to be used with other elements of the game. In the context of how would you adjust that in the case of the gun, either don't have it or have it only at the start and fade out, and then let other things stack in. So if the enemy pushes you, you can still feel that even after you started shooting the gun, and you're still shooting it. In regards to the actual feedback being detrimental, I literally had a problem with that today where I went to a store to buy some food and I had to use my credit card and I had to input the code. And I was inputting my code quickly because I know my code. I'm not trying to waste time. I pressed the buttons and it said wrong code. And I pressed the buttons again and it said wrong code. Now, the problem was, looking at the device, it was respecting my inputs slowly and it was not taking some of them when I pressed fast. It made a sound that I'm clicking correctly every single time, but it didn't actually input the numbers. It was incredibly frustrating. So yeah, it has to be feedback. It can't just be, hey, you pressed successfully. The success here is not that you pressed the button, it's that the button did what you intended it to do.
So before we go on, I wanted to give Andrew a real quick second because I know he's got to go in a minute. To just tell everybody what was on sale of his, because he's still got crazy amount of assets available, right?
Pretty much, this is the first time that the Asset Store has invited all of my major bundles to the sale at once. So they're all 50% off. The 13-pack bundle, the low poly 20-pack bundle, even the Medieval Village is 50% off. But all the monster bundles too. Each monster bundle has 4 monsters in it, and they're all 50% off. So something like $75 for 4 different characters. So now it's just a great time to load up on those, in my opinion, if I can say so for my biased self. But yeah, this is just, we have a large library. It all works really well together, super customizable. I'm sure a lot of the viewers here already know about the stuff, but they're very heavily customizable. A lot of them come with sound effects and music. All of those things can be interchanged between the different characters too. So sounds from one character can be used in another, and so on, in lots of various ways. So yeah, there's just a lot of stuff available right now. It's a great time.
Yeah, there's a lot of really
and I
cool
can
ones
attest
in
they
there.
are offered very, very nicely, and the blend shapes are fantastic. The textures are good. Yeah, worth.
Thank you.
Yeah, the blend shapes are the best part. It's very, very, very cool. That and the weapon customization. So go check them out. I just linked it in the description. Everybody can go take a peek. But I wanted to make sure that we shared those before you have to go. And then you'd also linked over this feel asset. You want to briefly just tell everybody what that is?
Someone mentioned an asset called something and I wonder if they were thinking of feel. It was a one-word asset in the chat, but we were talking about Juice talking about feedback, and that's what this asset provides. It's my understanding, and Unity recently did a live stream during not GDC Unite, with the developer Freya from Shapes and Renaud from More Mountains here. It's about, it provides a lot of just easy to use feedback bits, whether it be shaking a camera or adding a little haptic feedback, as you see there, or a particle, just to add that to your game and to make things a little bit easier.
And to hammer down the point of this asset is that sometimes you want to experiment. There are many ways to give feedback to someone, and there are so many, in fact, that the little details matter. And you're testing something over time. Most of these feedbacks are not instant. We don't recognize something just like that unless it's something that's consistent, it's staying. It has time for us to perceive. If you have audio that's playing for 1 out of 60 frames, you may hear it, you may miss it, you may think something bad happened and something bugged out. We play things over time, and this occurs for animation as well. Turning could be something that's instant, but you won't notice it necessarily, or won't get to feel good about it because just the sprites got swapped. So we do animations, color turning to green, character turning to the right, enemy turning into a splosh of red. All of these things matter, and they take time, and developing it slowly is bad. Feel gives you instant drop downs for most of the things you'll ever need, and a quick play button to see that feedback and to stack it up in a way that you want, with quick disable, enable, everything you would need to construct a good experience fast and well.
All right. Well, Andrew, were you going to head out now?
Yep, I'm being called into a meeting in a few minutes, so I gotta go prep for that. So
yeah, no problem.
Thanks, everyone.
I'm going to wrap up in just a few minutes anyway. So good seeing you, Andrew, and see
too.
you next week.
Have a fantastic day.
Oh, next week it'll be Black Friday, huh? Yep. That, of course, now Black Friday stuff in the US started like I don't know, last month sometime.
June. It started in June.
Yeah, I'm getting all these emails now about the Black Friday sales ending today. I'm like, it's not even the right week yet. They're like, yeah, our final sales are right now. Like, okay, a little early, but whatever. So there were. I want to pop this question up real quick, Jason, because I've used fmod and I stopped using it because it ended up just overcomplicating things for me in my own project. I'm curious, are you still using it? Somebody asked Jason Story, have you ever used fmod? They're using it for their game, but are you still using it regularly, or where do you recommend using it?
Yeah, I am. Just to kind of double down on what we said earlier, I never start with fmod. It's kind of no point. It's too heavy for what you're doing. But where fmod I guess long story short is I think fmod is de facto the best way to do audio in Unity, in my opinion. But that doesn't mean you use it every time. Like, you don't need to use the best tool for every project ever. You use the best tool when you need the best tool. And the strengths it gives you are, in my opinion, one, the fact that it's parallel, which means you don't have to deal with any messing with fading out between scenes and all that stuff. So you get really nice audio fading between menus and between scene transitions, which I think is such a marker of quality. And the biggest one is the fact that you can actually hire a sound designer. This is the one that I think people miss. Is actually had a huge debate about this in my Discord like 2 days ago. It was a huge conversation. And I still think my point was missed. I don't think people understood what I was trying to say. It's very easy to go, should I use this? Yes or no? And it's complicated. 100% agree with Jason Weimann that it's not something you need to dive into. But adding to your project, the benefit you get isn't adding it to your project. That's not what benefit you're getting. What benefit you're getting is, we talked earlier about the cost of compound changes, and audio is the perfect example. If your game is 5 sounds and you decide to change all 5 sounds to something else, or you want to add a other dimension where the whole game switches and all the sounds have an underwater sound, you have 5 sounds to change. If you've got a game with 500 sounds and you decide to add 2 alternate dimensions, the fire realm and the lightning realm, and you now have to have every sound changed to the lightning counterpart or the fire counterpart, you've got an infinite amount of work there. And the reason why that's a bad thing isn't even the work. You, as a creative person, are trying to make a game, and in an ideal world, you make the best game you can. So you want to have creative decisions that you make that make the game better, and then you want to make those creative decisions. But if the cost of work to implement a creative decision is so high that you're going to choose not to do it, your actual product will suffer as a direct result of previous architectural decisions. And that is the cost you're paying. You will actively make a worse product because your philosophy, the way you think about your own project, will be avoiding complicated things that could make your project better. And the thing is, sound doesn't need to be like that. If you use fmod, not early, but like in the first few months of a project, when it starts to build up a bit of traction, you can just draw a line in the sand and say, footstep sound here, enter battle sound, exit battle sound, pick up item sound. And then you can later on go dimension variable, and dimension 1, dimension 2, dimension 3. And then if you add 2 more dimensions to your game, you don't actually have to change a single thing. Your sound designer opens up the file, and then based on that number, chooses to crossfade and blend different tracks. So the value isn't in the fmod, and it isn't in the sound effects. The value is in the fact that you can make a creative decision to make your game better, and it has 0 consequences, because you can end up working on the game and not limiting your creativity based on the hypothetical cost of stuff from the past that you've kind of brought in that legacy decision making. So I guess where that line is going to depend on your project. But the fact of the matter is, if you get to the point that your game sound is an actual integral part, and it's going to take you longer than a week to change out sounds en masse, move over to something better, because the benefit you get is, if your game is mediocre with like sound effects you've used off the asset store, but you finally have the budget, you've gotten a publisher and you've got the budget to make a game, you don't want to lock your entire game up and have to have a developer and a sound designer work in tandem for 4 months to swap every single sound effect to make your game better, when you could instead hire a studio like Power Up Audio, give them 20,000, give them your single fmod project, walk away, and they'll come back with a beautiful mix perfectly made for your game, and you haven't had to change a single line of code. And the cost of that benefit, like, it's amazing the difference. So the example that I used as a final closing part on this, a lot of people will judge the decision making based on how much it costs them now. And if you made that decision, if you're about to go mountain climbing, based on how long it'll take me to pack my bag of my mountain climbing gear, or whether I just leave out the door now, I will be reevaluating that decision halfway up the mountain, really thinking I might have picked something different if I put any thought into this. And a game is not something you're making for a month. If it's a small project, fine. If you're intending to make a game and you intend at any point it's going to be developed later for months or years and have more people on it, then make the decision and save yourself the hassle later. And this is a philosophy that goes well past audio, but audio is probably the biggest visible example because it's a cross-cutting concern that hits every single thing in your project, every menu, every button, every interaction. So it's the most visible example of this, but everything in your game is like this. Where do you save your data? Where does your save files go? Where does your high score system go? Just think about this stuff. Don't screw yourself later from a decision you made early. That's why I like fmod.
And to just add a tiny bit for the people who don't know what fmod is. So fmod is, to put it in a very abstracted way, it's a way to play audio in the game. And Unity actually uses it under the hood for you already. When you use the audio player components in Unity, you're actually using fmod, but it's abstracted.
Yeah, it's fmod core 4, I think is what they said. So the actual, literally default Unity is already using fmod.
Yeah, but when you use it with Unity components, the components are somewhere in your game objects and they are scattered all around the game code. When you use the fmod plugin, you're cutting out every bit of audio in your game into commands that say, play the audio. Who plays the audio? The audio player that's somewhere out there in the ether. It's a separate process, literally, that can play the audio even as Unity does whatever it wants. Unity can get stuck for 5 minutes. It doesn't care. It plays the audio. And the commands are just abstractions of what you actually want. And you can give it variables, the variables being, I am in dimension 1, I am using element of fire, I am against fire boss 2. And with these variables, fmod can just choose to play whatever it wants. It's literally a mixing board for all the sounds that you have and all the variables that are at play to choose which sound to play and how you want it to be played in a single space that somebody else can work on. It's good for teams. It's perfect for it because you can hand it off and everything is there for the user.
It does take a little bit of setup, though. So when you're ready to do it, make sure you don't just give yourself 10 minutes. Give yourself an hour or two to start digging in and get it figured out, just the very basics and stuff. But yeah, it's definitely cool. So I'm glad to see that you're still actively using it too. I was kind of curious what your answer was going to be. I didn't really know. Did you have something else, Uri?
Yeah, I just want to say that the point of this abstraction is because when you want to let other people work on it, when you want to work in parallel, you don't want all your game objects locked because the audio designer needs to start swapping everything, and you don't want to start chasing references of all of this just because you wanted to add a new variation of your audio because there's a new fire dimension. So this is a good way to show why abstraction helps. There is a sound player out there. Here's what I need to play. I don't care what you're doing with it. Just go and do it. And you can do that for every system in your game. Recently in Terraria, we actually had to implement some system I can kind of make adjacent to it. The Labor of Love update that came out this year added a new liquid. And this liquid is called the Shimmer. And this liquid has many, many features. But one of them was swapping out the NPCs. And specifically, we're just swapping out their clothes, but we had no system for it earlier. We had to start supporting more variations of every single NPC for the variations they already have because we had a party, we had a blood moon, etc., etc. The code required to do it basically multiplied the amount of all the NPCs that we have to present, and we had to make a sensible way to control all these variations. And abstracting it helped a lot because we can just say, hey, it's Shimmer, do whatever. So yeah, just you can put it in any portion of your game, but with Unity, it's extremely easy to do it because you can just send audio commands somewhere else. You can't do that with the renderer, sadly, and this is why we are at the mercy of URP, HDRP, burp. It's being worked on, though.
There is one other thing. It's a slight tangent, but I think it's worth mentioning. What a lot of people naively think is when we talk about the idea that you have a system and it does X, and then if you don't have an abstraction and you make it more complicated, the cost of that is X plus additional development. If it takes me a week to add this feature, it's going to take me a week to add this feature, right? That's never, ever what happens. The biggest cost of software development is not the development itself, it's the cost of regressions. So the idea is, if you've got a footstep system that says, if I step on grass, play grass sound. If I step on rock, play rock sound. That is code. That is a business rule. That's logic written into something. And if you make a change that says, okay, if I'm wearing the silent boots, then specifically on grass, it makes no sound, but on rock, it makes a lighter sound. You now have to make if statement changes to all of those things. And so the cost isn't the cost of development. The cost is now that you've made those changes, you have to recheck everything that was previously working both before and now with this new change. And the truth is, it very rarely works exactly as it used to. Usually something broke. And now you have to find out what broke, and now you have to fix the thing that broke, and now you're paying the cost of those, what are called regressions. So, and that's only the ones you know about. There's often side effects where you didn't realize that you've actually broken a different system because you've added more variables or you've changed something. So the cost, the benefit of abstraction isn't just the fact that you're saving yourself the hassle of development, but it means the consequences of a fix or change don't ripple through your project. There is a boundary line where stuff either breaks or exists past this line, and if you want to change it, you change it in that one place. If you made a system, fmod being the example, that you send an index for what surface you're on, and then an event that says play footstep, you can add 1, 10, or 10,000 different surfaces, and the amount of lines of code that change are literally zero. You have no extra work that grows proportional to the changes. So not only are you not paying the cost of extra development, you're not paying the cost of checking every subsequent surface multiple times over to ensure they all still work as they did with every new permutation of combinations of stuff. So the real benefit of doing boundary lines is that you don't have to verify that you didn't break something by rewriting code. And the example I've used for this is a metaphor. If you had a device like a kettle plugged directly into your wall and wired up, and you had to unwire it and strip the cables and plug the toaster in whenever you wanted to use it, the cost of that isn't the cost of the time of stripping the cable. The cost of, are you going to electrocute yourself or are you going to break your house because you're dealing with a complicated system just to do something that theoretically should be trivial? Putting a plug socket, the benefit of the plug socket isn't the saved time of stripping the wires. It is the saved time of the complexity and the lack of risk of consequences that have happened to just do something simple as unplugging and plugging back in.
All right. Well, I gotta wrap things up for the week. A couple things going on later on today, but I wanted to say thanks to everybody for coming out. I gotta look at the camera; it's over here. It's confusing me. So thanks to everybody for coming out, and especially Story for. Oh, I cannot point the right direction either. I'm all kinds of mixed up here. But yeah, especially Story. It's been a while. I've been missing you, man. Hopefully we can chat some more soon. But yeah, thanks, Yori, Dave, and Andrew, too, and everybody who came out and chat. Please hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, and share. And also don't forget to check out the flash deals that are linked down below. That, like I said, they're changing every day. It's like there's 2 to 5. I don't know the exact number. Seems to be quite a few of them that pop up each day, and they last for 24 hours. So go check them out. I've just been watching and seeing if there's any cool ones that I don't already have that are popping up. I've got a lot of them, but
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. Anybody got any last words you guys want to share? Say anything you want to put out there before we head out?
Unreal Engine 5.1 came out, and it's amazing. Go check it out.
I'll have to check that out next week.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right. Well, I guess with that, I'll say goodbye and see you next week. Just don't forget to hit all the buttons and all that fun stuff. And I'm just gonna sit here now and sit silently.
Bye.
Yeah.